All right, so here we go. Chapter 14, a monocentric city. So we're going to look at land and labor. We're going to even look at climate and technology, wages. So monocentric city. What does monocentric mean? What do you think? Monocentric city. That's kind of a weird word. Why don't you guys open up?
Mono is one.
Oh.
One center.
Yeah, Kyle. I don't know if that was Kyle, but one center. Yeah, the mono part. Let's open up the chat box. Have all of you guys take some guesses. Monocentric city. What that means to you? We'll do a little chat box work here. And then if you want, you can kind of add what killed it, but I guess we'll talk about what it is. So one center, one center, one center. Yeah, so it's the city. It's a little bit more than having a center. So what goes on in the center of the city? So mono. The city's got a center, but it's centric. What's going on in the center of the city is what we want to think about. So answer in the chat box. What do you think? Yeah, commerce. So some sort of business activity. Possibly some schools, although schools would have been probably spread out a little bit more just because you wanted to be close to the kids. So it's definitely more on the commerce side. Probably some crime in there, yeah. But yeah, the businesses, that was the main thing, is that it's business activity that started. So we're going to take a little bit of a historical look here on the center city. So cities tended to be monocentric historically. So basically all of the business activity was at the center of the city. But that disappeared. So in the chat box, what killed it? What do you think killed this idea? We're no longer that way, right? We've got stuff out in the suburbs. We talked about urban sprawl. Internet's a little too modern, but had the internet existed back then, absolutely. We're seeing more and more dispersion of us being able to do what we're doing today on Zoom. So cars, yes, cars, caravans. Little bit probably with income, but really the big one is the vehicles, yes. So the automobile and truck really killed this idea of the monocentric city. But it's still useful to look at this, not just from historical purposes, but just to think about some of the interactions of what causes people to locate where they're at. So the classic city had 4 assumptions. Central export node. What do you think that means? Chat box that one. Central export node. What does that one mean? Trading post, yeah, one primary distribution center, yeah. So we're thinking about exporting goods and services. So that's the economic activity of the town is at this central location. We got mostly horse and buggy, horse and carts. And then as it evolved, as the streetcar was invented, we had a hub and spoke streetcar. What does hub and spoke mean in terms of design? Trying to describe that in the chat box. Hub and spoke streetcar. That's like the Model T wheel, but we want to put that to the city. So what, with the streetcar, what did it do? And why was it a hub and spoke? Okay, got people out. Why did it almost need to be a hub and spoke? So you guys, somebody said kind of the old Model T wheel, like a, or a wagon wheel, where the hub is at the center and then you've got the spokes of the wheel going outward. what caused it to have to be looking that way? Take people out from the center, good. Drove all the goods out from the hub, right? So if you have all the economic activity, all the businesses are located in one spot, then we need to disperse that out to people. And so that was how the city evolved with businesses being there. Right, so the city center is kind of the focal point of the metropolitan area. Give this little bullet a read. Okay, so we got that agglomeration word. I think I want to hear somebody this time. So let me, Dakota, looks like you're first on the hit list here for getting something verbalized. So agglomeration economy in production. What does that mean from our previous chapters, our work that we've been putting in this class?
Yeah, it's talking about how all the factories are clustering together to make things cheaper, or get lower production costs and stuff like that, and they get other perks from agglomeration.
Okay, good. So lower production costs, either Dakota or somebody else, what were some of the ways that production costs got lowered? We actually covered like 4 different things that gave rise to agglomeration, lower production through clustering.
It's like sharing like a common labor pool, one of them.
Good, yep, common labor pool is one of them, yep. Anybody else?
Technology.
Technology. So what was going on with technology? Because agglomeration technology wouldn't necessarily all by its lonesome cause companies to cluster.
Well, like a new technology could be like, I don't know, maybe gas station or something, different type of fuel.
Different type of fuel would cause them to cluster though? So that would just be usually...
Well, if it was at like a central place.
What
like
you're
an
saying?
Electric car.
Okay, yeah, so getting to share an input, right? So shared intermediate inputs was one of them. If we had the button manufacturer, that the dressmakers would locate closely to the button maker. And so being able to share some of those costs. So that was part of why we'd see, especially early on, those companies want to be near each other anyway for all those various reasons we talked about in the past. Okay, so let's see here. So in the chat box, oops, sorry. I don't even know if you guys can see that or not, but I made my chat box huge, okay. So what are some images that come to mind for you of the big city around 1900? So I just kind of want you to, on the chat box now, everybody can kind of chime in. What are some images that come to mind? And I know some of you don't know history, but I'm giving you a hint. It was mass car production started by Henry in 1920. All right, Wall Street. Yeah, we got some old images of Wall Street, horse and buggy. All right, some factory production starting, yep. Times Square, okay. Trains, yep, the trolleys were just starting. So lots of different things were changing around this time. So here's kind of the hot ones and the timing of the history of them. So the omnibus, 1827. So that's an old word. Does anybody know what that is? I don't really expect you to know what it is, but maybe some of you know your history better than others. Notice that that was the first innovation way back in 1827. I already said the car, the first automobile wasn't even invented till like 1895 or so. So the omnibus. Nobody? So I didn't know this either actually until I started studying a little bit of this, but it's the car transported by horse. So JC, maybe did a little quick Google search or something, which is fine. Unless you knew that. Did you know that? You can, it doesn't matter either way. And no, you're not getting an extra credit point for it, but not this time anyway. So yeah, they would pull cars that were on a rail system of some sort. So it was mass transport for people, but it was still horse driven. And so Omni meant for everyone. So it was a bus for everyone. And then later, as the automobile evolved, Omni was dropped off and we just call it the bus. So the motorized bus word came originally from that. All right, so that gives you a little bit of history. The framing is important. So down here, we did a little bit of this with the last one, but if you look at production of buildings, we don't get to the steel frame until 1885, which was much less. So buildings were a combination of stone and concrete. And originally they came up with this balloon framing, which was a kind of highly specialized, high skill. The laborers had to be highly skilled carpenters, which made it more expensive to build taller buildings. So even when they were building like a 3-story building, it was kind of an intricate way to engineer the wood and to put it together. And then cast iron came around and you could use more low skill labor for cast iron. And so the cast iron then would be a combination of iron and concrete. So we're still using that. And then finally the steel frame, this is what gives rise to the going vertical. But even more so than that was probably the invention of the elevator that allowed people, because they were still restricted by stairs. We don't get the elevator, I think, until 1850 with Oda, or not 1850. Well, the first original elevator. The first one was powered by steam, and then the next one by electricity, which allowed them to go even more. Okay, so in this model, we've got bid rent functions. So we've kind of got the city evolving here at the center. So here's the center, right? So if this thing was drawn a little bit differently, at 0, we're at the center of the city, the very center. And so the offices are going to be able to afford more than others. So let's go to the chat box and answer that question. Why is it the offices as opposed to manufacturing that allows them to be able to afford the center of the city? All right, good. The knowledge spills. Less land. You know, Daniel, your comment on needing less land, that building up, remember from the previous chapter, is more expensive. So that in and of itself wouldn't be a function of it per se. Just because but you're right, it can be more dense in terms of office workers using cubicles instead of some sort of manufacturing floor. So you're absolutely right there. But in and of itself, it wouldn't give us the reason to be able to build up. But the offices with the face-to-face interaction, all the stuff that we talked about from the bid rent function chapter, is what gives rise to them being able to pay more. And then we move into the manufacturing area. So the idea with how they're working this model is that we've got the center of the city defined here from X1. Now, if we were using circles, you can imagine that that would be the area representing offices. And then the manufacturing city would be a ring around the center, something like this, right? And so we'd have manufacturing land that's going to be the people being able to afford that land is the manufacturing area. And then finally, the X3 residential pulls us out to this yellow. And so there's the monocentric city. We're kind of using this in 2 dimensions, the way the author has it here, but you can kind of think about it 3-dimensionally that way, or if that helps you visualize a little bit more of what's going on with the center. Okay, let me pause for 10 seconds. Questions or comments? I guess I wanted to mention the agricultural land, right? So here, once we get out here, then the rest of this all becomes, I'll put it in green so that we're growing. So all of this is ag land. Oops. So the ag land would be surrounding it. Wow, what a pretty picture. Okay. Let me pause then. Any questions on that? With the bid rent function. So they're kind of overlapping bid rent functions now to give a dimension to the city. All right. Oh, there was my bird. I want to move her. Okay, so one of the assumptions, and well, early on was true, but all the employment is there. So all the employment, if you wanted to work, you were in the city, right, with towards the center. So all the employment is in that area between the manufacturing and the downtown. And so why do all the manufacturers and office firms locate in the central area far from their workers in the residential district? I guess we kind of answered that question. That was part of the textbook ones. I probably should delete since we kind of did that. But, so same reasons there for they can afford it more was the point of that question. And so here is our old model for where we locate. We've kind of used this in different ways. But we've got a combination of freight costs and labor costs. And so we're thinking 20th century now again with horse and streetcars. So don't forget that. We've got our assumption of the model here. And distance from the center. So here's the center of the city. As we move further out, we start to have a labor cost savings if we locate closer to our workers. This is one of the, I think, the little, these were tricky but slippery points of this model is why is our labor cost going down as the business moves away from the center? Maybe if somebody wants to unmute for that one. Why is labor cost?
Is it because the transport cost for workers is, so the willingness is lower?
Yep, you got it. So if we move closer to our workers, they don't have to commute. And so I don't have to pay them quite as high of a wage is the underlying assumption there. So as we move to position 10, we could pick up our workers the cheapest possible. So that's good, but our freight cost is going to be really high. Why? Because now we're moving our freight back to the city to sell. Because under the model assumption, all the business activity is actually going on in the center. And so if the freight cost is more expensive because you have horse carts relative to transporting workers on streetcars, then we still have this desire to locate in the center from a cost minimization standpoint of freight cost and labor cost. Okay, let me pause there. Questions or comments? All right. So the interactions of people and land is the focus here. And so the idea is we're thinking of a small city, with, like there's many cities in the nation. It's not just one big, Chicago or New York, but, a number of cities evolve and these cities are specialized like we talked about before. The utility of the residents is determined at the national level, unaffected by changes in the city. Why, from our previous chapter a long time ago, I don't know if this would have been chapter 5 or 6 or something, but way back when, we talked about utility levels being the same nationally. Why would we predict that? So first, and maybe we should talk with utility. In fact, I'd like to see this on the chat box. What is utility? Some of you have heard that word 100 times. Others of you have only heard it a few times if you're just coming out of principles class. What is utility? Okay, yep. I mean, happiness, your satisfaction that you get from consumption, if we're talking about consumption of goods. Okay, so we're saying that national happiness is going to be the same. It's determined at the national level, and it's unaffected by the city. Why would we expect utility levels to be similar? And I think they're making a real strong assumption here, but in our previous chapter, what did people do, if you want to chat this, what did people do if there was a difference in utility? What would they do? Yeah. So the Thiebaud hypothesis is people are just going to move. And so when they move, we had congestion being added to a city, right? Bringing their utility level down because of congestion. And as people leave one other city, utility goes up with the congestion factor anyway. So that underlying assumption isn't too bad compared to, or for what we've done in the past, what we were working on. Okay, so what does this start to look like now? Whoops. Let me make the chat box big. Okay. All right, so give this a read. Okay, so the textbook, first of all, is going to make this assumption so that this doesn't throw you too much. We assume it's a rectangle, so I put this little picture down, drew it myself here. The area of the city is a rectangle rather than a circle. That's just to simplify the math as we start to look at like square area, like square feet or square meters. So let's make it a square so that we don't have to do, what is it, pi r squared or whatever to find the area of a circle, right? It gets kind of wonky on us if we have to try to figure out areas of rings. So that's why they do that, just to make it a rectangle for modeling purposes, to make square feet easy. So we're going to have a 10-foot or a 10 kilometer height or width, depending on how you're looking at it. And then the length here is going to be determined kind of similar to what we were doing before with breaking up that area into maybe the office area, manufacturing, and residential, depending on where the bid rent functions are. Okay, so let's see, next. All right, so your author's calling this a general equilibrium analysis. Probably a little strong, but that's okay. We can work with it. So he tries to analyze different markets all at the same time on kind of the interaction of some things. And it's kind of neat what we try to do with the model, but it probably has its limits too. So here's our labor supply and labor demand curve that we've done from other chapters, chapter and even other classes. So who's the demand? Let's go to the chat box here. Who's the people who demand labor? who are these guys over here? Firms, good. Firms, businesses, companies, yep. So those are the people that want to buy labor. So they're thinking about profit maximization as part of their function. And so in terms of the leftover principle, this question's kind of pressing us to think about why that would be less. So if a person demands a higher pay, the labor demand function goes down, right? So we go from 120 down to some number down here at a higher wage. So how does that connect to the leftover principle? Put that in the chat box. So what's the leftover principle? So we're thinking about the negatively sloped labor demand curve. And so I'm hoping some of you kind of just put what the leftover principle is in general, because I think that's good to be, that's kind of a theme that we're continuing since we learned it the first time. What is the leftover principle? And so wages go up. Okay, fair enough, Jana. Jana, think about profits. Okay, there, JC's got non-land cost. I assume there's an extra O in there anyway, that it wasn't the cost that you have at noon every day. So good. All right, so we're trying to get non-land costs. So the leftover principle was relating it back to land. And so if wages go up, we're going to have less left over, right? And so we're going to have to cut back on some of our workers. And for the labor supply function, it's kind of similar. Let's see. Undo, clear my drawing, what is it? Oh, wait, I wanted to use the, I think I can use the undo. There we go. Oh, so much fun. I suppose I could pull out the eraser. Maybe that's all I want to do. Let's just clear the whole thing. Okay, sorry. I'm having fun with this new technology, trying to anyway. So labor supply, so these are households. And so why is their supply upward sloping? So in order to induce people to work more, this is saying there needs to be an increase in wage to get people to work more. Why is that?
Is it because they have more left over?
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of put that into words. Why don't you try to type something up for that and see what you come up with.
Is it the fact that when you increase the wage, households are more willing to pay for housing? More expensive housing?
Okay, so yeah, we want to tie it back to housing. Yes, so the picture to the left is our bid rent curve, right? So yes, with the extra pay, we're going to be able to supply more workers and ultimately have more left over, right, to bid up the land. Okay, so that's these two connections. So over here again, on the graph to the left, same picture we did before. So the businesses and the residents bid rent functions intersect here at point A, meaning that closer to the city center, businesses are willing to pay more than residents. But as we start to get further away, the trade-offs are different. And so the businesses that are further away don't have as much incentive to locate there at all. And instead people are going to locate there. And that's in this section. So residents are outbidding the business function. And then again, the city limits are going to be pushed out to where the ag land is being outbid by residents. So if we're too far from the city, the commuting cost is going to be too high, and agriculture is going to make more money. And so this is, again, defining the boundaries of the city. All right, 10-second pause. Questions or comments on that?
So why is it negatively sloped? The implications, like what are the implications, like exactly?
Okay, so and that is exactly where the leftover principle plays in. Is when we're closer together, like for the businesses, for instance, we have the agglomeration, and so there's more left over of after paying our non-land costs. There's more left over to be able to pay for land. And so that's what the bid rent curve, it's downward sloping in the sense that once I get away from the center, once I move away from the center, I'm losing all that agglomeration of being there. I'm also, from the previous graph, increasing my cost. Remember the freight cost and the labor cost. My total cost is going up as I do that. And so that's what's driving that downward slope of the bid rent functions. Okay. All right, so what happened with the streetcar? So general equilibrium effects of the streetcar. So initially, our picture is just the two. This picture is what we had before. So that's the two pictures, that's the size of the residential area. So when the streetcar came up, maybe go to your chat box, what happened so that the city expanded? Look at this change in R. The residential area expanded out. So what happened that the streetcar caused that to shift? People that live further away can drive to their jobs, not really drive, but ride the streetcar anyway, right? Good. They're commuting in from further away. What does it say about, yeah, okay, good, Nate. I'm glad you put the transportation cost, because it's the cost that went down, right? When you had to, and by the way, remember, it's hard to do this, but we're going back to that 1800s time frame, horse and buggy and your feet. So the most common way you got to work is you walked, right? Before the streetcar, you would just walk. And so that's why you really had to be tight to the city. The distances weren't terribly far. And they're basing part of this on real world data. You see how the old city was 6 kilometers from the center. And so you might be able to walk or, get a ride or share something with some sort of horse and buggy, depending on what area you're from. But you can walk 4 kilometers, right, to get to work. But it's pretty difficult to do that on a regular basis. And then the streetcar comes in, and now we've got our city expanding out to 14 from the center. So now we can take that streetcar in and not have to walk, which was much less costly in terms of your opportunity cost, because now instead of walking, to walk 4 kilometers, people usually do, somewhere between a 15 to up to a 20-minute mile, if you want to think of it that way. So to walk 3 kilometers, you're talking 45 minutes to an hour of going 4 kilometers. So you've got an hour's worth of walking time. That's your commute. And of course, we know people who commute an hour to work, right, in their car. If you're living in LA or some of the bigger cities, you can have that sort of commute time. So what's kind of interesting over time is that people have a certain tolerance for the commute. And whatever that time is, if it was walking, you'd walk for an hour. If it was driving, you might drive up to an hour. But we see that type of thing happening even in the modern cities. Okay. All right. I think any other questions there?
Yeah, I got a question.
Okay.
Back in that day, though, weren't most people like agricultural workers? So they just like lived on their farms instead of walking that far?
Well, so yeah, we are talking about the city. So there was a large fraction of people that were living on the farm, but that's not our people. Back to my other picture, they're still on the farm doing their ag stuff. But
Okay, yeah.
yeah, it's the people who chose to move to the city as the factory evolved and developed. Yeah. Good.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see. Excess supply of labor. All right. We'll leave that one. Okay, so the thing that changed on that last graph that might not have picked out is the residential bid curve kind of shifting down and rotating is what that did. So this is just another picture highlighting the streetcar with the changes in equilibrium. In the textbook, he's got a couple of the panels next to each other. So how does the streetcar increase the size of the business district and the residential district? So if we go back to here, our business district was 2. And so what he's trying to highlight is, why did the business district grow? Oops, I didn't need to do that. I thought I had my marker on.
Cute cat.
What's that?
JC's cat.
Oh, you're talking about cat. I didn't see it. Okay. So we went from 2 to 4. So what happened to this bid rent function for the offices? This one right here.
It became less steep.
No. More steep? So it didn't more than just get steeper. But you're right, that is part of it. If that was JC, I think.
No, that was me.
That was you. All right, so if we go back to the previous one, the streetcar starts to shift down and the business initial can grow. So if this shifted out, oops, let me get my drawing. Oops, I didn't do the curve. I thought I did the curve. Oh, it's going crazy on its own. I picked the straight line instead of my squiggly. So that can move us out to a new location. But we had 2 things going on, the rise of the streetcar and that. So we've got a city that's changing with a bigger business, which makes sense with our intuition, with the cities changing and having a bigger business district and more people. So they're kind of moving together. All right. Okay, so here's the final streetcar effect. And I'm not thrilled with how the author did this. It's a little hard to walk through at first, but it's fine. But he's got the new one and the old one. So the old picture is this one with the thin lines. So the thin dark line is the old bid rent function, and the thin line here is the residence. And then afterwards, it shifts to this kinked thing, the thicker lines. So now we've got the thicker lines here. And so that is the double movement here of the streetcar. So we've got agriculture, the city expands, so that's over to X3. So the city goes out from where it used to be for agriculture. It flattens so we can bring more workers in. The bid rent function actually shifted to the right, so we get to this thicker line here, and then we get this kink right in the middle where it's just overlapping. I mean, they just didn't continue the lines on. So the main thing is that the residents now are at a higher level. than where they were. So residents here, this is where, like if this line continued out and this one continued down, right? We just have the same thing going on before, but we have the business sector increasing and residents getting cheaper land because of the streetcar. Okay, so streetcar, bid for land, I think we just kind of walked through that. 10-second pause for questions. All right. So to wrap up, we kind of want to think about the assumptions of the model. So give this a read. This is kind of thick. I'll just let you read it first. So, a lot of garbly gook there. Let's start with density. What did that mean? Employment density, residential density. What did the density mean?
Where they live, basically. So if they're living in the city and they work in the city, and so basically if there are more people working, the employment density is higher up, and then the residential density is the same thing, or they're moved out, so it could be.
Okay. Yeah, so with density, there's going to be more people in a fixed amount of land, like per square mile. If there's an increase in density, there'd be more people concentrated in a particular area. So we're assuming both employment density and residential density are fixed, which means that's not necessarily the case. So we could have more people working in a fixed amount of area as buildings started to become, as some of the comments you guys were making earlier, as buildings started to go vertical, we could increase density in there. But those were assumed to be fixed. We had an even density across for this, the way we just modeled that. So that's just something to think about, that we wouldn't necessarily have the business sector get more land to grow in physical area if technology evolved at the same time that allowed it to be more dense. So input substitution, consumer substitution. So what are the implications of allowing those? So first of all, what is input substitution? Maybe go to the chat box on this one. Input substitution by firms. No copies. Not sure what you mean by that one, Kyle. Having replacement of something, Jana, of what for what? Having replacement of what? Different suppliers, perhaps. There are no subs for workers. Good, Olivia. So kind of with input substitution, if we talk in the most general terms like we did with that isoquant from the previous chapter, it's substituting labor for capital or capital for land. So input substitution, if prices change, then we're not going to have those fixed proportions. Remember some of the early models we did early on that had fixed proportions, that you always had to use 60% machines and 40% labor or something. In reality, if labor becomes more expensive, people can substitute a machine for a person or vice versa. Okay, so the model has no input substitution. And so from the labor market standpoint, some of their behavior is going to be different than others. Ooh, Luke, how'd you get the good background? You don't have the backdrop there either. Did you add that in? Go ahead and unmute, because I'm kind of curious.
So basically, you
get with backgrounds too.
You go to stop video, or like the little up bar on it, and you choose virtual background, and then it takes you here, and you just basically download a picture that's on your on your laptop or whatever you're using.
Oh, you can download a picture from anywhere.
Yeah, and then it's just, you just choose mirror my video, and it will basically just put it behind you.
Oh wow! So the technology's gotten better. So you don't because you're still in your living room, right? You don't have to play a green screen anymore. I don't.
No, I can just take it off too.
Yeah, so it's kind of like what Snapchat does with all of our stuff. Okay. All right, I might have to play around with that. So that's in the video options. All right, we'll get back to substitution here. So with consumer substitution, what do people in the cities tend to do with the places? Let's think of New York City, where people are now confined to their, because of the virus, they have to stay at home. What's their home look like? Like how many square feet does $500,000 buy you in Manhattan?
Couple inches.
Couple inches, probably something like that, right? So part of the consumer substitution is that, remember at the beginning when we started the chapter, we said that the density was the same. So people might live in, let's say, 1,000 square foot residence is the thing. But in reality, if prices go up, consumers will substitute for a smaller area to live closer, depending on their circumstances. So anyway, that's going to have some implications on the choices being made as well. And I think some of our problems then will kind of push you on thinking about relaxing some of those assumptions. So, all right. This is our last one. So, well, come in and get it. Gosh, my wife was like expecting me. I'm right in the middle of lectures.
No,
So,
I didn't want to
well, what am
bother
I
you.
supposed to do? Why not come in discreetly? Here, come here, come here. This is my wife.
Where are you?
That doesn't understand that
Hello.
that was really kind of dumb. To,
Hi.
knock, knock,
I
knock.
just
Can you
wanted to
come
let her know I
in?
needed to come get the
Well,
stapler.
instead, you should just come in, be quiet.
Fine.
All right.
Don't criticize me for
So we're all learning. We're all learning here. All right. Take the dog out. We're almost done anyway, but. All right. Let's see. So back to work here. I don't know if I had anything. That was pretty much.
It's 250.
Oh, this was the sea level one. Okay. So yeah, we'll just wrap up with this. So basically the author wants you to think about, well, what happens if climate change happens and wipes out our city, like Miami comes to mind? What would be some of the impacts of that? And so the shaded area is the amount of the city that gets wiped out by a flood. So the shaded area is the business that climate change ends up wiping out in some way, shape, or form. And so what would be the impact of that? Well, the businesses are going to have to move. They're going to be able to outbid some of the residents now. And the city's going to morph accordingly, with them not being able to pay as much with the leftover principal. They're going to have to move into the residential areas. So that's kind of a quick look at that. Looks like it's time to go.